Okay, well, thank you all for being on this call and sharing with us. And so, why don't we begin by going around and having you introduce yourselves? Of course, your name, your country of origin, any languages that you speak, anything that you'd like to start us off with.
My name is John, originally from Kenya, and been in this country for 2 years. So I'm educated in the West, here in the US. Yeah.
Thank you. And what languages do you speak, John, besides English, of course?
Yes, well, I do speak, in Kenya, we speak Swahili. It's one of the national languages, and of course, English. And then I was in Germany. So I learned German before I came to the United States. I was in Germany for 6 months. And, Germans are so proud of their language. And it's either you learn the language or you starve. And so I had to learn German. So I speak German. In total, I speak about 5 languages.
Nice, 5 languages. Wow,
Wow.
Yeah.
wonderful.
My name is Felicia. My mom was born in Puerto Rico, and my dad is Black American. So I have a very my sense of culture and identity is very integrated. So, but it leans more heavily towards my Hispanic side because I was raised by my mom.
Mhm.
So most of my nostalgia, most of the food and the things that I connect with the most, like it comes from my Hispanic side. So
Mhm.
I grew up in Jersey City, and then we moved around a little bit between New York and New Jersey because my mom got the call to ministry, so she decided to become a pastor in the Salvation Army, and she did that for 30 years. Um, so I've lived in different kind of communities. I've lived in suburbs, I've lived in urban areas. I do speak Spanish. And the way, people often ask me, how do I identify myself? I identify myself as a Black woman, but with two cultural identities. So like I'm a Black Latina,
Mhm.
and I also, celebrate the part of me that is African American. So it's not complicated for me. It's just something that have always operated. I think it's complicated for other people because when they don't know what to make of you, people try to make their own assumptions about what
Yeah.
you should be.
And it can be a multicultural identity. We kind
Yeah.
of try to put people in boxes a lot of the
Yeah.
time. But
Hi, my name is Renato Martinez, and I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Um, my parents, they are from Guatemala, Central America, and they have 5 kids in Guatemala, and I was the last of the bunch. And we actually call ourselves the Brady Bunch. Like
He's number 6.
I'm the last, the youngest. There's
I-
3 boys and 3 girls, and we used to call ourselves like the Black Brady Bunch. I'm the youngest of the 6. But yeah, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, um, and got involved with a ministry there, Christian Life Center at the time, and now it's called Christian Cultural Center. And I was part of their, I still am actually part of their prison ministry. Go minister to prisons. I do speak another language. I speak Spanish. Um, just like Felicia, a lot of people, they kind of get shocked when they know that I can speak Spanish. They're like, "What? But you're Black. You have no accent or anything like that." I said, "Yes, I know." I said, "But I consider myself a Black Hispanic," and then I have to get into them. I have to share with them the history of my background. Um,
So I'd love to talk about myself, but I just feel like my lovely husband left out some really amazing details about his
okay.
family. He doesn't appreciate the nuances of the family because he's been in it. I was married into it, so I appreciate some of the more unique things. They have an entire community in Guatemala that is basically dominated by their people, and they are called the Garifuna people.
Yeah.
And they are basically the landlords and the ruling class in that area called Livingston and Barrios. So it's really an amazing experience to go visit there and see how they flourish in their community. So as for myself, I am of Haitian background. My parents immigrated to the U.S. in '69,
Mhm.
and my brother and I were a family of two. My brother and we were born and raised here. I also grew up in Jersey City.
Yay!
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
and we are so Haitian Americans tend to be very insular people, especially first generation. We collect, we cluster, and wherever we are, we bring more because we want to be with our family. So it's been wonderful to grow up in that environment. I always felt like I was never lonely. I had always a ton of cousins around. So I say that we're only a family of two, but I feel like I have like 16 brothers and sisters. So literally, there was a summer there were 15 people sleeping in our basement, all under 16 years old. So that was the best. So anyway, I do speak two other languages, French and Creole,
Nice.
and I have learned Spanish. So now I speak, I guess, three other
Three
languages.
now.
Wow. Oh,
We
good.
have a very multilingual community. I love it. I love it.
Mhm.
So what is unique about your family's home country, whether it's your culture?
Yes, there's so much I can talk about Kenya. By the way, Kenya is located in the eastern side of Africa. The equator crosses right in the middle of Kenya.
Ah,
A beautiful country. I always tell people that it's a photographer's dream to go to. When you think about safaris and you're going to see the animals and the big animal reserves in the world, then you're talking about Kenya. There's some areas you think that, you're in the middle of Times Square. But the one thing as far as I would say the culture is concerned, it's a very communal society. And when I first came to the United States, which would be the West, it's more of a capitalistic society. So you're dealing with two different societies here. And somebody like me, having come from a communal society into individualistic society of capitalism, it was a challenge to adjust. That transition took a long time to understand how the West functions and how they relate with one another. Now, going back, if you're coming from a communal society, it's where people live together as a community and people support each other. And if there's a need, the community will get involved and try to resolve issues. For instance, if I'm to have a bad day back home, people will tell that. They will see me and they'll be like, John, is everything okay with you? You look like you're tired today, or is everything okay with your family? That's the communal society. In the West, I learned how to tell people what I need. I mean, it has to come from me. Tell people how my day was or how I am doing. And that alone I could understand. So that's the one difference. The one thing that I miss very much is that my wife, again, she is from Nepal, which happens to be also another communal society, being an Asian. Nepal is sandwiched between China and India, the highest country in the world. That's where Mount Everest is. And so, both of us met here, and God has blessed us with two beautiful children. It's hard when you're mixed family to say that, okay, this is my culture, or this is, because again, you're mixed.
There's a blend.
And you really don't know what direction the children are taking, of course. But John grew up speaking Nepalese because my mother-in-law was from Nepal, and then in Swahili here and there, but it's hard. It's to be honest with you, it's the hustle bustle of life takes away from that time with the kid where you.
Yeah. That's actually a good point you bring up, John.
Yeah.
So is it important to you that your children speak other languages? And do you find you're teaching at home? It sounds like it's been a little difficult as they get older.
It is, because the one thing is you teach them the language, and like as I say, and my mother-in-law doesn't speak English, and she was here, helping us raise the kids.
Okay.
So, and the kids didn't speak Nepalese either. So what happened? Just between the two of them, somehow they were able to teach each other, and my mother-in-law was able to teach Nepalese. I don't tell them, I get along with my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, because she doesn't speak English and I don't speak Nepalese.
Ah.
So it's the high five and thumbs up, and that's how.
May I add something to that? Is it all right if I add something to what he's saying?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so I mean, coming from a mixed background myself, mixed parentage, I will say that when you are a multiracial child or person, it does take a while to form your own identity. Like there always comes a moment, especially as kids get older, and I could see that as your children get older, they start to question more certain things, and because other people start to question their identity, and then they start questioning their own identity. Then what am I more of? Am I more of this? Am I more of that? And I think language is also sometimes a language is a beautiful thing. Sometimes it can also be a point of contention when you're mixed, because like for me, I didn't grow up speaking Spanish really regularly in my house. Like I learned Spanish when I was older. So like it took it like not having that complete connection to my culture and that affected my identity, because I felt like, I can't really consider myself Puerto Rican unless I speak perfect fluent Spanish. You know what I mean? But what I realize is that, you can connect completely to your culture and your identity, even if you don't speak the language perfectly, because culture and identity is so much deeper than that. So like for me, it's the food, it's the history, it's, the traditions, like all that stuff that's ingrained that helped me to feel like, no, like I am like, I am fully Puerto Rican and fully African American. Like I could be both at the same time, So I just wanted to add that, because I know it's tough when you're raising kids and you're trying to explain different things to them and help them with, guide them through as they're going through this identity process.
That's big. Yeah, that's big. That ever present question that you can get sometimes, what are you?
Yeah.
That's like
I'm human.
Putting a person in a box, right? That's for that person to decide and define. It's so interesting you bring up language in that way too, Felicia, because one thing I noticed, definitely in college, I lived in the International Living Center, so I had friends from all over the world. And I noticed with some of them, for instance, there was a young man of Indian descent who was Canadian. His parents actually emphasized English over his language, their home language. So it wasn't that he didn't want to learn. I think they were so interested, or it was so important to them for him to assimilate, that they kind of held back. And so kind of a similar case. And the joke is I had another friend, Rich from the Bronx, who's Puerto Rican. I spoke more Spanish than him. That was one of my majors. So he could understand it, right? Because his grandmother, but he could not really speak it. So it was like, but it didn't make him any less, Puerto Rican, full-blooded. So, it's a matter of kind of how you see yourself. And it's good to hear that from you too, though, because it might help others who are kind of grappling and struggling with things like that. But language is a part of our culture, right? When it can. So cool that you learned it on your own as you got older. Let me ask you, Felicia, you kind of chimed in on the language, but to you, what do you feel is really unique about your home country, or the home country of your parents and your culture?
I guess one thing that comes to mind is because Puerto Rico is a commonwealth, so it has ties to the United States, and to the island. And even though there's been like all this, back and forth over the generations, over, if are they going to become a state, are they going to be a country, like all this stuff like that. But one thing that I know that's consistent about Puerto Rican culture is that there is a tie to our people. There is like a pride in our culture that, regardless of whether, what the status is of the island, that doesn't go away. It's like, for example, people make fun of Puerto Ricans all the time because, especially in New York, because you see the flag everywhere, on the car, on the dashboard, on your clothes, inside, on your sneakers, because it's that sense of, we're connected by that sense of pride and community. And even from my African American side, like, I know my dad was very intentional about helping me to make connections between island culture and our African American history culture, like with just our African roots, so I was able to kind of put those together at a young age, and to see like, wow, we have a lot of Africa in Puerto Rican culture, and most of us are proud of that, that and the indigenous culture that we have there too, the Tainos, so I think that's one thing that I really love, and I think that it doesn't matter what you speak or how, what your connection is to Puerto Rico, if you're a quarter Puerto Rican, whatever, that connection is there, and I see it and I feel it. So.
Good. So for the Martinez family, and share with us, what you think is unique about each of your home countries and the culture that comes with that.
I'd love to talk about Haiti. I think that it is one of the most misunderstood places. Unless you are from the island, usually your perception is of abject poverty and very few resources, very few contributions to the world. And that is so far from the truth. The diaspora, the Haitians that are outside of Haiti, form one of the most productive set of people, productive set of immigrants in the Western Hemisphere. We are doctors and lawyers and engineers. I mean, one of the jokes was that Haiti's major export was brain power. And it really amazing. Yeah. Where everywhere you go, we really do value education and success. It is very common to see even the poorest Haitians coming from the lowest classes in Haiti that are uneducated. When they immigrate here, they rise to the top of their class or to their field because their parents are so passionate about you. I also feel that it's been our blessing to be the first Black independent nation in the Western Hemisphere, because we have a sense of pride in that we don't need anyone to validate us. We know we have been our own ruling state. We have ruled ourselves, and we carry the ancient pride that would have been before the time of slavery. So we know that we don't need to prove ourselves. And so it's very important to say that Haitians are some of the most loyal Americans you will find, because we really value what the United States stands for, and the freedoms that we have here, and the quality of our lives here. Not that we don't value our own, but we respect what is here in America. It's an interesting perspective. Americans can't lump all African people together in their mindsets. Right. It's very segmented, very diverse, very diverse. We bond with each other over our music, over our food, and over our ideals for our kids. It's every Haitian American's dream that their kids will be the doctor and the lawyer and the engineer. So this is what common aspirations are in our community, and it doesn't matter from where you are, like in the lower segments or the middle class segments or the upper class. We all have the same kind of vision for our kids. I remember that it was just drilled into me that I make my own way, and not that other people may think otherwise in other segments. I'm not putting any other community down in any way, but I'm saying that I think the Haitian community in particular, I think because we are immigrants, feel a more of a burden to just put up, shut up, and rise. That's how we've been taught.
I think something you said is really important. And I think it happens with many of the islands and with some of the African countries. People make assumptions that all there is poverty and jungle, and, it's not quote unquote civilized, where you have some of the most beautiful beaches, some of the most beautiful landscapes, and there's commerce and all kinds of things going on. And of course, tourism also a part of that. So I'm glad that you spoke to that.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Just piggybacking on the message from this past Sunday with Pastor Doug, one of the things that he mentioned was how instead of being judgmental, having that mindset of being, a judge, instead we should have that mindset of being curious, to get to know the person, whatever cultural background that they're from. And, one of the things I've also learned too, that's always quick, that we should always be quick to understand a person, before we judge them, but many times we do the opposite. We're quick to judge before we understand or before we become curious about their background. And that's very key. Because when I visited Haiti with our kids when they were younger a few years ago, and I saw places that just dropped my jaw, and I was like, wow, this is Haiti. Along different beautiful beaches in certain areas. What areas was that we?
Jacmel.
Yeah, Jacmel. And it was beautiful, and I was just amazed because many times here in America, when I would look at things about Haiti in the news, all you saw was the bad stuff,
Right.
And the ugly part of the country, the poverty and everything, but they don't show you the good stuff. So I was just amazed. I was like, wow. But yeah, it was that was a blessing. But going back to where I come from, in Guatemala, my parents are in Guatemala. I'm still learning a lot about the culture of of Guatemala in terms of our people. We come from a people, we're known as the Garifuna, is what we're called. And we are a minority in Guatemala. So most people, when they hear of a person that comes from Guatemala, they don't immediately in their mind, they don't think of a dark-skinned person like myself. They would think of someone that's, lighter, fair skin, straight hair, and that's the perception that they'll have. So that is what's unique to us as a people, as the Garifuna people, and that we are a minority. There's a small sect of us. We dominate the Livingston area of Guatemala. I learned that through history that that's one of the places that they had established for themselves to grow as a community, from there. And basically, we have our roots from St. Vincent. Supposedly there was a slave ship that shipwrecked, and those slaves that were on that ship, which came from Nigeria, they wound up going into St. Vincent, which is the island that was closest to the shipwreck. And as a result, they migrated and infiltrated that country there. And from there, they moved on to Honduras, Belize, and then from there into Guatemala. And the Spanish part of us comes from Spain, because Spain at one time, they dominated Guatemala. And so that's why I'm able to speak Spanish. And the Garifuna, they have their own language that it's mixed with an African tongue, an Indian tongue, and it's like a whole different flavor of languages all mixed together. I cannot speak it though. My parents, they speak it, and growing up at home, they would basically speak with us, with myself and my siblings in Spanish. and not the other language. And I learned Spanish at home. I didn't get the formal education. I just got it from home. I never went to school for it, and that's how I learned it. So it's funny because when it came to learning how to read it and write it, I was never taught it. And when I met my wife Josie, she knows, she had a formal education. She knows how to read it and write it. So sometimes I'll go to her, how do you write this? You know, but I mean, you know, I can read it, but in terms of like writing it, I had to, you know, learn how to do that. But that's what's very unique with the Garifuna people from Guatemala. And it's so interesting too. I'll never forget when I first moved to Staten Island. It was my first apartment when I was single, and I'm getting my furniture put in. You know, I had it delivered, and the men that came to bring the furniture in, you know, they were there, you know, asking me questions where to put it, and so on and so forth, and I was telling them where to put it, and then then I decided to talk to them in Spanish, you know, because I knew they were Spanish. And I said to them, please put this in my bedroom over here. And I told them in Spanish, and they were shocked. Their jaw just dropped to the floor, and they were like, "You speak Spanish?" I says, "Yes, I speak Spanish." And then I said, "Oh, you thought this black guy couldn't speak Spanish, huh?" And then they said, "Oh yeah, oh okay, all right." And then they said, "And where are you from?" And then I told them, "I'm from Guatemala." And they were like,
Still blew their
"Guatemala?"
mind.
They said, "No." They said, "We're from Guatemala too."
Whoa. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I
cool.
said, well, I says, there are people, dark-skinned people that live in Guatemala too. And then I explained to them, you know, my cultural background, my culture and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, because I love that history. I'm a history buff, and I love to hear the movement of people and how your ancestors and their ancestors made their way to Guatemala. Beautiful. But well, let's talk about if there are any cultural traditions that you want to share, any that are important to you, whether you share or celebrate certain types of special occasions, traditions, anything like that.
Yes, I lived in Kenya all my life until I came to this country, grew up there, and the lifestyle there is a little bit laid back compared to the life here. So the one thing that I miss, and I still remember that, it's during Christmas in Kenya, the Christmas trees were never meant to be in the house.
Oh, okay.
So things like, Christmas trees, you would only find it in a church where everybody came and brought their gifts and put under the tree, and they still do that even today, where the Christmas tree they just have one Christmas tree for the whole community, and that tree is in a church, right on the altar. And that's a tradition that, I miss. I miss the music, and things like that I will always remember. Then come here in the US and with my kids, of course, we have a Christmas tree in the house. But every time I put up a tree in my house here, it just brings me back to my childhood and my, the memories that I have.
I think, a lot of my experience, I tied to food, because, growing up with my grandmother, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother when my mom was working in the summers, my brother and sister and I. So we saw her prepare different dishes, and I love Puerto Rican cuisine because, I didn't learn till I got older, but like you could see the influence of the three cultures, the European, the native, the indigenous, and the African in our food. Like, for example, one of my favorite things that I love that I'm still fighting with my aunt to this day, because when my grandmother passed, I wanted her pilon, and that's the mortar and pestle. And that's like where you grind, you pound the herbs and the spices, or you pound plantains, or, whatever. And I realized, I was like, that's not unique to us. Like, that type of, tool like is all over the world. But like, for me, it holds like sentimental value because it represents like all the meals that were prepared making that, and I wish I would have spent more time watching my grandmother more and asking more questions, because there are certain things like Christmas is huge also for us. So there's traditions like I haven't participated in this. I know my grandmother and other family members have, called a paranda, where it's basically called like an assault. Like, so you go to people's houses and you kind of like, you're playing instruments and banging pots and pans, you bring you food, and then you got basically kidnap them and they come with you to the next person's house, and then you get food and snacks and stuff, and you just keep going throughout the community until you have like this huge group of people in the paranda. I love pasteles. That's a whole process of making like these I don't know what we would say in English. It's kind of like a tamale, but it's done with different spices and different ingredients, and that's a huge thing at Christmas. Like, you can't have Christmas without pasteles and coquito. So rum, rum is a big thing. Gotta have that little bit of coquito, and I think, outside of food, it's just like, I love there's a respect for elders and community. So like, for example, if you go into a house and you have older people there, if you don't get their blessing, there's an exchange that happens. It's like you have to ask for their blessing. You say bendición, and then they say back to you, Dios te bendiga, may God bless you.
Okay.
So, but if you don't say that, you're in big trouble, because that's like the utmost disrespect. So, it's like you just don't walk into a house and just ignore people. Like, you don't walk past them. Like,
right.
So that I love that about our culture, that we're very mindful of how we treat and talk to older people, and just manners in general.
So I want to piggyback off of that, because we share a similar tradition, and that is, at any family event, the children must go in and find every single authority figure, elder in the house, and greet them with a kiss.
I love it.
And it is extremely important. And yeah, sometimes our kids lay back too much, getting too into the American flow of, things, and forget. And we hear about it for weeks.
Yeah.
I have to actually go back to that house and have those boys kiss those elders. I'm very happy that they are enforcing that, because we need to really show that is the stuff of life. It is the connection with the past that allows us to go strongly forward. So that's one thing. Another thing I wanted to mention were dogs. I find it extremely interesting, the different relationship between that Haitians have with dogs, compared to Americans. In Haiti, dogs are outside creatures. They are outside creatures. They are dirty. They can be cared for. They're not abused, hopefully, but never inside a house. So you don't find anybody cuddling with their dog in their bed. It is just not what we do. So now we call it Americanization, when you've got your dog, and my father's looking at me with my dog like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I'm rubbing my dog. I'm playing with my dog. I love my dog. I said, Daddy, I'm sorry, but I like this part of America. I love my dog.
It's interesting how traditions carry over.
It's funny because the people, like, sometimes they try to sneak affection to the dog. I've seen that too. Like, where, like they say, oh, I don't want to mess with this dog, or, it's dirty, whatever. But then on the side, you'll see them like being kind to the dog or throwing the dog, like, so they don't want to show affection, but like they show affection when they think you're not looking.
Right.
It's funny because my family's from the South, and it's a very similar thing, but it's a warmer climate, right? Like, yeah, you have a nice dog house. You keep the dog outside. Play with the dog outside. It's a different feel, but yeah.
But they're not like part of the family.
No, not in that way.
Not like that.
And here we are all.
You don't have Fifi's ashes
have
on top
names.
of the mantle.
We don't even name them.
Oh, wow.
Chien. That's what we call them. Dog number one. Dog number two. There's one more thing I wanted to talk about, which actually is extremely telling of how our cultures are, the core of our cultures, the core values. It's what happens at funerals. So in our community, a funeral can happen over several days, 3 days. The first day is what you would typically see anywhere. It's the wake, and then there's a service, and then a burial. But after that, there is a prayer service. You know, depending on the religion, we are mostly Catholic and Christian, Protestant. Haitians are more Catholic than Protestant, but both are there. And in both cases, there's a assembly at the house of the person who deceased or the closest person to the deceased. And you stay there and you are fed. And it is not a 1 hour repast. It is an all-nighter. You are there, you come in and you come out as you need to. You are, if it's a warm day, you're outside in the backyard and you're making jokes. You're telling stories. I never forgot that scene when I was at, and it's amazing how people have identified the matriarch or the patriarch of the family who's responsible. Nobody has to tell them, but they know this is your role. You sit, you tell stories, you make us laugh. Some of the best jokes I learned at those funerals, at those gatherings. And I learned about how our family keeps strong, because we're telling each other, you've lost somebody, but you've got everyone else around you. We're never leaving you. We're not leaving you. We're a part of you. You will make it.
With us from Guatemala, one of the traditions that they have with the when a person passes away, they pretty much start to, in honor of them, have food set aside to because they feel that their spirit still stays here on earth. And basically it's known as ancestral worship too. Besides them, they also tie in the ancestors as well, and they hold ceremonies and things of that nature to honor, the deceased. And on occasion throughout the years, sometimes they'll do that as well. Growing up in the family, I felt uncomfortable when I would go to some of those gatherings that they would have, because I didn't understand a lot of it. But when I became a Christian, I began to understand more of what that was all about, what the Bible had to say about those things regarding ancestral worship. And I must say, in the beginning, when I became a Christian, there was a lot of headbanging going on, because between myself and my parents, my uncles, because this is what they were brought up underneath, what they were taught, their tradition, and they were passing it on to everyone else. And it was hard for me to embrace it once I understood truth according to what the Bible had to say about that. And I was like, yeah, but God forbids these things. But they were like, yeah, but you got to follow, because this is our tradition. I said, I understand it's your tradition. I said, but it's not going to be mine.
Yeah,
but
that's a good point. I mean, that's something that needs to be said. I think we have to distinguish the traditions of men that are not necessarily sanctified. And that's one thing that we've learned in our faith, coming out of our upbringing and seeing everything that our parents did not make it all right. And we every culture needs to bring their culture to the cross and sanctify it. Lord, show us what is of you, what is valuable, what is consistent with the kingdom, which is our primary culture now, and tell us what we need to discard, because that is our first identity as being kingdom people.
Yes. And I had to learn how to love like the Lord does with us when we were sinners. He loved us as we were, and then he saved us and delivered us. And I had to learn how to love my family, in spite of the traditions that they held on to very strong, even to this day. And recognizing that, like the Bible says, love covers a multitude of sins, and that's how God looks at us, and that's how they'll be one to Him, as I continue to point them to the Lord. Yeah. So I don't look to judge and like, oh, you gotta stop. That's how I was in the beginning, but God had to humble me. He had to groom me, now my approach is different now.
Yeah, beautiful. We can learn a lot from both of you. One final question that we wanted to put out there. Just wanted to check and see if anyone would be interested in talking about just your own personal identity as a person of color in your community, your circle of influence. Is there anything that you wanted to share about that, or if you want to, if there's any particular prayer requests that you have, how we might be in prayer with you or for you in that way?
Yeah, let me say that back in 1995, I was nominated for the Martin Luther King Award in Kenya. I came to this country in 1998, but twice I got nominated for the Martin Luther King Award for fighting for the rights of street children in Nairobi. I was one of the first people that started a feeding program in the city of Nairobi, which today is a big institution that supports people with orphan children. And so when I came to this country in 98, I would say that having come from Africa and being an African, I was kind of naive and did not understand. First, I didn't know that I was Black, which is it would sound so foreign to you, but and the school I came to was in upstate New York. It's a small institution called Word of Life. It's up in the Adirondack Mountains. So you can imagine coming from Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, to the Adirondack Mountains. I had never seen snow, and you can imagine how much snow they get up there in those mountains. And the school was predominantly Asian. I would say maybe we were 3 or 4 people of color. And when I was filling out my application and going through the admission process, to me, it did not make sense when they kept asking me, what's your color? In other words, what's your, are you Black? Are you white? Are you Hispanic? So to me, that really confused me because I would put that I'm Kenyan. Because nobody had ever called me Black. That was non-existent. And so even today, I still struggle with that. But anyway, I learned, I went through the orientation at the college, and learned a little bit about the American culture and the African American, what they have been through, and to me, it was tragic when I learned about the struggles that the African Americans have gone through in this country. And somebody like me who came voluntarily here, I never, jump through the fence or swim across, a river to get into the United States. I came here at my own volition. I wanted to be here. I wanted to study and improve myself. In a way, I did not have any preconceived notions about racism or when we talk about these racial issues that are going on today. And so I would say that my first 2 years in the school that I was in, I had such a wonderful time. I learned so much. And being African, to me, was a plus to come here as an African or as a Kenyan to Word of Life Bible Institute in upstate New York. But again, it also was a blessing in disguise, because I took so many things for granted. I did not understand what the African American culture and what they have gone through. When I came here, somebody who has identity. I'm a Kenyan, my culture and my traditions are Kenyan. And so with identity comes purpose.
Yeah.
I I know what direction I want to take. I know why I came here, to educate myself, prove myself.
And yeah, because you're sharing kind of this international view. You had a national identity as a Kenyan, right? And you didn't necessarily have to break yourself down into any particular group or race or category. So
Exactly.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
beauty in that.
I was going to say, kind of piggyback a little bit on what John said. I think we have to acknowledge and just, appreciate the fact that the Black experience is different depending on where you come from. You're not going to get the same experience if you're raised in the Caribbean or from the Caribbean, or if you're from Africa, or if you're from the United States. So I think that kind of, sometimes we get blurred all together, like as if we all have had the same experiences or backgrounds. And that's something that I'm always trying to kind of gently correct people on, you know what I mean? Do it in a way that's loving, but like just let them know, like, hey, there's someone from a country in Africa is not going to have the same experiences or ideas about race and culture like the same like I have. For example, like I had to explain to someone one time and said, listen, because it was a heated conversation, but they were talking about like, well, why are Black people so, caught up in slavery? Why are they, still talking about this and angry about this and that? And I had to like really kind of break it down, like as far as how close African Americans are to enslavement. We're not that far removed from enslavement. For example, in my family, my great grandfather was a slave, and the generations that came after that, they went through Jim Crow. They got lynched. That's the whole reason why my family's in New Jersey. Because they were escaping lynchings. They literally fled from the South because they were being persecuted, and they started their life, here in New Jersey. And
the Great Migration.
Yes. And along with that also came like these generational traumas and fear, and as an adult now I could look back on some of that and I could say, you know what? I want to break those generational traumas. Like I want to break that fear, that spirit of fear that underlines like everything, and it impacts everything, the kind of careers you go for, the confidence you have, how you feel when you walk into a room and you're the only one of color, like just different things. I used to feel very inferior, walking into a room full of white people. And I'm just be honest, like, and I used to feel like I wasn't enough, or I wasn't, I had to kind of dummy myself down, but then I realized that was self-trauma, and I had to like look at that and deal with that and ask God to help me to see truth, not what, I believed. So, I think that it's an ongoing process, because I still find myself having to step back and say, hey, wait a minute, because in education, especially, I'm in a lot of spaces where I'm the other, I am one of the few. So, learning how to conduct myself and carry myself as a Black woman, and what that looks like, and, how I feel people see me, or, how I represent myself, I overanalyze and think about it. So like, I'm trying to learn like how to just like process that and scale back and just like, let God lead whatever the situation is. You know what I mean?
That's deep though. That's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot there.
I would say for me, I'm thankful that my parents, they never said to me or any of my siblings, you're a darker skinned, person, and you're gonna have limitations going into society, and they never brought up color to us. And my dad, just observing him, he was a good role model in that sense, because he would always integrate with any culture. And I also believe too that one of the things that influenced him is that he was influenced by an Italian priest growing up,
Mm.
and we got a lot of good values from him, which he brought into our family. And that's how, as a matter of fact, that's how I got my name. I have actually an Italian name, Renato. It's called.
Renato.
Yes, I don't have it's not Ronaldo, it's Renato. But that is what has been a blessing to me. Yeah.
When I came here, I did not understand, just like John said, I did not understand that I was Black. If you asked me what I was, I'd say I was Haitian American. And that meant so much to me that it seemed strange to have to peg it down to something so amorphous, so undefined as Black. What is that? I didn't understand that. And I had a lot of pride. My parents filled us with, and it wasn't necessarily good pride. I learned, as I said, to bring that to the cross and let him humble me and give me the true perspective. But we always knew that we were one step away from ruling our nation. And we had family members that were presidents and ministers of, and administrative positions. So we came here feeling like we could run this place. And so that was a blessing, because we didn't come in with the insecurities, the trauma. We had different trauma from our dictators in Haiti. We had completely different trauma, but we had trauma too. So having come into this community and been here, I grew up here, but let me tell you, you don't become an American until you leave your nest. You're in Haiti until you're grown, basically, because your family is Haiti. It's little Haiti. And then you come out and go into the high schools and the colleges. Now you start to understand what it is to be an American. That's when you start learning. And it's been an amazing process and humbling for me to see what African Americans have suffered. And now I have to say that we have a serious heart for justice. Seeing what has happened and is coming into our experiences now, just daily. And we really do have a burden. And we consider ourselves partnered with the African American community to see things righted. And we understand, though, that we have a responsibility in that. And so the prayer request I have is that we could be given wisdom, because the one unique thing we have, I think, in our Haitian culture is that we often find ourselves in the midst of two communities, because they'll easily say to us, oh, you're not Black. And I've had people tell me that.
Really?
As recently as last week. I don't consider you Black. I consider you more French. I've had people say that to me. I love them. I know they're coming from a good heart, but they don't understand what they're doing when they say that. They don't understand that what they've just said is that because of your level, your standard, you can't be associated with the Black people. They don't recognize that they just said that. But we have to re-educate them. We have to let them realize, no, this is what Black people are like. You just didn't realize, I am part of the greater Black community, and I am proud to show you that this is what we look like. This is what we do. This is how we carry ourselves, And so what my point is that I take very seriously that role I have to be a liaison between communities. And I need to know how to use that to bring peace and understanding. And so I'm there carrying two burdens for both communities.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to carry that. And it's a really heavy responsibility. So that's what I would love prayer for: wisdom and courage, because you can just ignore, but God has called you to be peacemakers.